Hello everyone. Today I'm sharing with you how to avoid being overcharged for product detail, page outsourcing when billed by screen. This is a common problem for many merchants who outsource product detail pages, a problem they often find difficult to explain and suffer losses from. Because the reality is often, the quote doesn't seem high, but the calculated number of screens is surprisingly high, resulting in a very long page, but with very little truly useful information. You might start wondering, do I lack design knowledge? Or is this how screens are typically calculated? Here's a conclusion. The problem isn't with billing by screen, but with the lack of a defined standard for the number of screens. First, let's clarify. Billing by screen itself isn't inherently misleading. Billing by screen is essentially for standardizing workload, facilitating pricing, and reducing ambiguity. In many scenarios, it's reasonable. The real problem lies in the following. Your understanding of what counts as one screen is completely different from the outsourcing companies. 2. Why are product detail pages most prone to being overcounted? Because product detail pages inherently have three gray areas. First, screen image. Some outsourcing companies will break down a complete logic diagram into 2 to 3 screens while you think this was originally one screen's worth of content. Second, information is deliberately fragmented. One sentence per screen, one icon per screen. A very short description also counts as one screen. The result is a very long page with extremely low information density. Third, screens without informational value are also charged. For example, decorative transition pages, emotional atmosphere pages, plain background, plus one sentence. If you don't agree on this beforehand, these may all be counted as screens. 3. What you really need to guard against is not multiple screens, but ineffective screens. Here's a very important criterion. More screens don't necessarily mean higher prices, but rather, does each screen have independent value? A reasonable screen layout should, at least, meet one of the following criteria. Resolve a user question. Serve as a decision point. Clearly convey a key message. If it doesn't meet any of these three criteria, it's likely just filling the space. IV. To avoid being misled about screen counts, 4 things must be aligned in advance. First, define the standard for one screen. You can agree on this directly. One screen, one complete expression of information, not based on screen height, not based on visual segmentation. Once this is written into the requirements, the space for scrolling will immediately shrink. Second, define the information structure first, then determine the number of screens the correct order is. Confirm the structure first, then confirm how many screens are needed instead of, how many screens are you planning to make? You can ask the outsourcing team like this. How many problems does this detail page solve? Does each problem correspond to one screen? Number of issues. Reasonable number of screens. Third point. Agree on which content will not be counted as a separate screen. This is crucial. For example, clearly state in advance. Transition pages are not counted separately. Decorative mood pages are counted together. Very short information is merged into the previous screen. Clarify the items that can be merged beforehand, and you'll avoid disputes later. Fourth, confirm the final screen count is frozen in the initial draft stage. A mature collaboration always includes this step. After the initial draft structure is confirmed, the screen count is considered locked. Subsequent content optimization will not add screens. This avoids more screens with each revision, more charges for revisions. Fifth, a screen count prevention script that merchants can use directly. If you're worried about being penalized for excessive screen counts, you can say this directly. We're counting screens based on information nodes this time. Each screen needs to address a specific problem. Emotional, transitional content should be merged as much as possible. The screen count will not increase after the initial draft is confirmed. These 4 sentences can resolve 80% of screen count disputes. Sixth, when is multiple screens actually reasonable? To be honest, not all multiple screens are a scam. If your product has a high average order value, is complex to use, and has many user concerns, then multiple screens actually reduce conversion risk. The key isn't how many, but rather, does each screen help the user make a decision? A word of truth for merchants outsourcing product detail pages per screen for the first time. What you really need to manage is not the number of screens, but rather, does it have structure? Does it have focus? Does it have informational value? When you treat screens as information units rather than length units, inflating the number of screens becomes much less likely. In short, to avoid being inflated when outsourcing product detail pages on a per-screen basis, the key is not to pressure for lower prices, but rather, first, define the information structure. Then define the standard for the number of screens. Clearly define what doesn't count as a screen. Lock in the number of screens up front. When screens return to their true meaning, effective information delivery, per-screen billing becomes a clear, controllable, and less contentious collaboration method.